I'm struck by the way Brian talked about the consequences of untold stories. There's a formulation of Gandhi's that falsehood and violence are necessarily linked, and a false narrative requires violence, absolutely dictates and mandates violence to enforce itself. I speak out of not so much a preservation experience, but an experience of the unmaking of places, the erasure of places in Chicago. Over the last 15 years, the elimination, and not just demolition, but I think erasure and disappearance are the appropriate words, of a city within the city, a sort of archipelago of public housing developments, some of them hugely concentrated on the south side, west side, always visible within the central city on the expressways that functioned as sort of moats around these developments. Anybody going anywhere in Chicago saw them even at 60 miles an hour at the periphery of their vision. Over an extraordinarily short period of time, they were demolished, and the population that lived in them was, I think it's appropriate to call it forced relocation, was pushed out of these highly visible vertical ghettos into a kind of invisible ghetto that expanded to receive them. Returning to Brian's remarks, these are precisely the refugees from terrorism in the South who came to Chicago, to the Promised Land. The refugee crisis continues, bureaucratically driven in this instance. And I think the first thing I want to say about this experience is, it was sort of extraordinary to witness and document the process by which people, places, and fundamental human rights issues are disappeared from public consciousness and from the policy conversation. So, the first thing to acknowledge, going back to themes of identity, is this was an extraordinary assault by way of place on the identity of individuals and communities. But it was also and traumatic and a continuing trauma for people. I mean, imagine in your own lives having the known world just destroyed, and then being told it was for your own good. Being told this was for your own sort of betterment. It's hard to imagine a more alienating, traumatic, disorienting experience. Well, that was the experience of whole communities in Chicago, of the most marginal and disenfranchised citizens of the city. But it's also, that whole phenomena also has had consequences for the rest of us. So the restructuring of the city, a restructuring on the scale of the period after the Chicago fire, I mean, this is really big, remaps our moral imaginations. It determines what we can see and who we can see, how issues are constructed. So I guess I'm still in a state of sort of stunned acknowledgement of the impact of this, and appreciate the occasions that the Trust has provided to sort of reflect on it. And we can talk some, downstream about the role and responsibilities of preservationists to that which has been disappeared. And the ways in which the built environment enforces the radical inequalities in American life, and at the same time hides it, and the kind of clarity of purpose and willingness to challenge that dynamic that would be required to really have the sort of conversation that Brian was inviting us to have.